Step outside now. The voice ripped through the quiet street before the sirens even finished echoing. Alicia Brooks stood frozen just inside her doorway, the faint hum of her refrigerator behind her, the smell of lemon cleaner still clinging to her hands. Red and blue lights bled through the thin curtains, painting her living room in restless color. 10 patrol cars. She counted them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. By the time she reached 10, her heartbeat had slowed instead of racing. That was the strange part. It didn't feel like panic. It felt like something else. Like the moment right before a storm decides where it will land. She opened the door slowly, bare feet against cold concrete. The night air brushed her skin, carrying the low static of police radios and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog that wouldn't stop. "Ma'am, step forward," a voice called. Firm, controlled, used to being obeyed. Alicia stepped out onto the porch, the wood creaking softly beneath her weight. Across the street, silhouettes gathered behind curtains. Phones lifted, tiny glowing rectangles watching her life unfold like it was something to scroll past later. Officer Daniel Hayes moved toward her, one hand resting near his belt, the other holding a flashlight that he didn't need but used anyway. The beam landed just below her eyes, never quite meeting them. "Alicia Brooks?" he asked, though his tone said he already knew. She nodded once. Slow. Measured. "We received a report," he continued, pausing just long enough to let the words carry weight, "that you may be harboring a fugitive." The word hung in the air, heavy and misplaced, like it didn't belong to her small house with its chipped paint and wind chimes that clicked softly in the breeze. Alicia blinked. Not fast. Not confused. Just once. "That's not possible," she said quietly. Her voice didn't shake. It surprised even her. Hayes glanced back at the line of officers behind him, then returned his gaze to her. "We're going to need you to step down here," he said, motioning toward the walkway. Another officer shifted, the faint crunch of gravel under his boots sounding louder than it should have. Alicia took one step forward, then another. The porch light flickered above her, casting a soft yellow halo that felt too warm for what was happening. "Who are you looking for?" she asked. Hayes checked something on a tablet handed to him. The glow lit his face from below, sharpening the lines around his mouth. He read the name out loud, and for the first time, something inside Alicia moved. Not fear. Not exactly. Something deeper. The kind that lives behind memory. The kind that doesn't fade just because time passes. She inhaled slowly, the air catching for half a second before settling. "That person," she said, her eyes finally lifting to meet his, steady and clear, "is gone." Hayes didn't respond right away. His jaw tightened, just slightly. Around them, the lights kept flashing. Red, blue, red, blue. Like the world was trying to decide what story this was going to be. Then he stepped closer, just a little too close. "Ma'am," he said, lower now, "we'll determine that." Alicia's hands rested at her sides. Still, open, not defensive, not surrendering, just there, present. She looked past him for a moment, at the line of cars, at the watching neighbors, at the quiet street that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Then back at him. "Can I make a call?" she asked. The question was simple, almost small. Hayes let out a short breath through his nose, something close to a laugh, but not quite. He glanced over his shoulder again, then back at her. "You've got 30 seconds, he said. Alicia nodded once more, reached into the pocket of her house sweater, pulled out her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen for just a moment, as if choosing mattered more than anything else right now. Then she pressed a name, lifted the phone to her ear, and waited. The line stayed silent just long enough for doubt to creep in. Not loud doubt, not panic, just a thin crack beneath Alicia Brooks' steady breath. The kind that asks if anyone on the other end will still remember who you are when you no longer stand in front of them. Her eyes did not move from Officer Hayes, but her focus had shifted somewhere deeper, somewhere older. Then a click, soft, distant, almost lost under the hum of radios and the ticking of a cooling engine nearby. A voice came through. Low, controlled, alert even in stillness. "This is Cole." Alicia exhaled, not relief, not quite, just recognition. "It is Alicia," she said, her tone even, no rush, no tremor, just a name placed. Carefully into the space between them. There was a pause, shorter this time, sharper, like a switch had been flipped on the other end. "Alicia," he repeated, and something in the way he said it made the air feel different, like the night had shifted its weight. Officer Hayes narrowed his eyes slightly, watching her, not the phone, her, as if the answer might be written somewhere on her face. "Are you safe?" the voice asked, direct, no wasted words. Alicia glanced briefly at the line of patrol. Cars, the lights still pulsing, reflecting in the glass of her front window, turning her home into something that looked like it belonged to someone else. Then back at Hayes. "I am standing outside my house," she said, "and they are asking about someone who is not here." Another pause. But this one carried something heavier, something calculating. "Who is asking?" the voice said. Alicia did not answer right away. She simply held Hayes' gaze for a second longer, long enough for him to feel it. Then she spoke. "Local police." Hayes shifted his stance, just slightly, but enough to change the rhythm of the moment. One of the officers behind him adjusted his grip on a notepad. Another turned his head as if trying to hear better without stepping closer. The neighborhood felt quieter now, like even the distant dog had stopped, listening. "Stay where you are," the voice said, calm, certain, not a suggestion, not a request. Alicia nodded once, even though he could not see it. "All right," she replied softly. The line went dead. No goodbye, no explanation, just an ending that felt more like a beginning. Alicia lowered the phone slowly, her fingers still wrapped around it, as if it carried weight now. Not physical, something else. Hayes tilted his head slightly, studying her again. "That your lawyer?" he asked, the hint of a smirk pulling at one corner of his mouth. Alicia slipped the phone back into her pocket, her movements unhurried, deliberate. "No," she said. Simple. Nothing. Added. Hayes let out a short breath, glancing over his shoulder toward the line of cars, then back at her. "Then I hope whoever that was can get here fast," he said, the words light. But his voice had changed, just enough to notice if you were listening closely. Alicia did not respond. She simply stood there, shoulders relaxed, hands still at her sides, as if the outcome had already been decided somewhere beyond this street, beyond the flashing lights, beyond the eyes watching from behind curtains. A faint breeze moved through the trees, carrying the soft chime of metal against metal from her porch, and for a moment, nothing happened, no orders, no movement, just waiting. But it was not the same waiting as before. This one had direction. This one had weight, and somewhere far off, so faint it could have been imagined, a different kind of engine began to rise. The sound grew slowly, not loud at first, just a low vibration threading through the quiet street, like something approaching from a distance that did not belong there. Alicia Brooks heard it before anyone else seemed to notice, her head tilted slightly, not searching, just listening, the kind of listening that comes from experience rather than curiosity. Officer Hayes followed her gaze instinctively, his brow tightening as he turned toward the far end of the block where the darkness met the curve of the road. The flashing red and blue lights continued their rhythm, but now they felt smaller, like they were being interrupted by something unseen. One of the officers near the second patrol car adjusted his radio, a faint static crackling as he spoke under his breath. "You hearing that?" Another officer glanced up, scanning the sky out of habit, then back down the street, unsure where to place the sound. It was not sirens. Not exactly. It was deeper, steadier, controlled, like engines that did not rush because they did not need to. Alicia's hands remained still at her sides, her breathing even, her eyes calm. She did not smile. She did not react. But something in her posture had shifted, something grounded, as if she had stepped onto solid ground while everyone else was still standing on something uncertain. Hayes took a step forward, then stopped, the gravel beneath his boot crunching louder than expected. He cleared his throat, trying to reassert the moment. "Ma'am, until we resolve this, I need you to remain right here." His voice carried authority, but it lacked the earlier certainty. Alicia nodded once, respectful, not submissive, just acknowledging the words without giving them weight. The sound grew clearer now. Engines approaching from more than one direction, not fast, not chaotic, precise. A black SUV turned onto the street first, its headlights cutting clean lines through the lingering glow of police lights. Then another followed, identical, measured, silent in intention if not in sound. They did not flash, they did not announce, they simply arrived, one by one, stopping in a line that did not break formation. The neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Curtains shifted, phones lifted higher. Even the wind felt like it had paused to watch. Hayes turned fully now, his shoulders squaring as he tried to understand what he was seeing. Who called this in? He muttered, not to Alicia, not to anyone in particular, just to fill the space that was beginning to feel unfamiliar. One of the officers behind him took a half step back without realizing it, adjusting his stance as if the ground itself had changed. The doors of the first SUV opened, not rushed, not dramatic, just precise. A man stepped out, tall, composed, dressed in dark civilian clothing that did not need to signal authority because it carried it. He closed the door gently, the sound soft but final. Then he looked directly toward Alicia, not scanning, not assessing, just seeing. Recognition passed across his face in a single controlled breath, and then he moved forward, each step deliberate, measured, as if he already understood exactly where this moment was going. Hayes stepped into his path slightly, not blocking, not welcoming, just placing himself there out of instinct. "Sir, this is an active situation," he began, his voice firm but edged with something new, something that had not been there before. The man did not stop immediately, but when he did, it was close enough that the space between them felt intentional, not accidental. "I am aware," he said, his voice calm, low, carrying weight without raising volume. He reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately, and for a brief second the entire line of officers seemed to tighten, not in fear, not exactly, but in awareness. Then he produced a small credential, holding it just long enough for Hayes to see, not long enough to question. Hayes' expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable, his jaw loosening, his eyes flicking once more toward Alicia, then back to the man in front of him. The night felt different now, not louder, not quieter, just changed, like a page had turned without anyone hearing it. And Alicia stood there, exactly where she had been, exactly as she was, watching it all unfold as if she had already known this moment would come. Hayes did not reach for the credential again. He did not need to. Whatever he saw in that brief second had already settled into his posture. His shoulders no longer squared in command, but held in something closer to restraint. The man in front of him slipped the identification back into his jacket with the same controlled motion. Nothing rushed, nothing exaggerated. Just enough to signal that the conversation had already shifted without needing to say it out loud. "Commander Ethan Cole," he said quietly, not as an introduction but as a confirmation, like stating something that did not require permission. Hayes nodded once, a small movement that carried more weight than any words he could have chosen. "Officer Hayes," he replied, his voice still steady but missing the earlier edge. Cole's gaze moved past him for a fraction of a second, landing on Alicia Brooks. And in that moment, everything else seemed to fade, not disappear, just fall into the background where it belonged. He gave her the slightest nod, almost unnoticeable unless you were looking for it, and she returned it just as subtly. No smile, no relief, just recognition, like two people acknowledging a truth that had already been lived through. The officers behind Hayes shifted again, their formation loosening without any direct order. Radios quieting as if instinct told them to listen instead of speak. One of the black SUVs idled softly, its engine steady, controlled, like it was waiting for instruction that had not yet been given. Hayes cleared his throat, the sound louder than he intended. "We received a report," he began, trying to anchor himself back into procedure, "that this residence may be connected to an active case." Cole did not interrupt. He simply listened, his expression unchanged. But there was something in the stillness that made the explanation feel smaller as it continued. "We are verifying information," Hayes added, his words careful now, chosen instead of assumed. Cole nodded once, acknowledging the process without agreeing to its direction. Then he spoke. "And what information led you here?" His tone was calm, even, but precise, like each word had a place and purpose. Hayes hesitated, not long. Just enough to reveal that the answer was not as solid as it had felt minutes ago. He glanced at the tablet still in his hand, the glow reflecting faintly on his face. "A name came up," he said finally, "connected to this address." Cole's eyes did not move. "A name," he repeated, not questioning, just placing the words back into the space between them. Hayes nodded. "Yes," he said, then added, quieter now. a fugitive. The words sounded different this time. Less certain, less anchored. Alicia stood a few feet away, listening without stepping in, her presence. Steady, not passive, just grounded. Cole turned his head slightly toward her again, then back to Hayes. That name you are looking for, he said, is not here. Hayes exhaled slowly, the air leaving him like something he had been holding without realizing it. That is what she said, he replied, glancing briefly toward Alicia, then back to Cole. Cole's gaze sharpened just enough to be felt. And you did not consider that she might be telling the truth? He asked, not accusing, not raising his voice, just laying the question down where it could not be ignored. Hayes did not answer immediately, the silence stretching between them, not hostile, but heavy with implication. One of the officers behind him shifted his weight again, the faint sound of fabric brushing against fabric cutting through the quiet. The neighborhood remained still, watching, waiting. The lights continued their slow pulse. But now they felt less like authority and more like noise. Cole took a small step forward, closing the distance just enough to change the balance of the moment. Before this goes any further, he said, his voice steady, controlled. You might want to take a second look at where that information came from. Hayes' eyes flicked down to the tablet again, then back up, something in his expression beginning to change, not fully, not yet, but enough to suggest that the certainty he arrived with was no longer standing on solid ground. And Alicia remained where she was, calm, silent, watching the shift happen not with satisfaction, not with triumph, but with the quiet understanding of someone who had already lived through what came next. Hayes looked down at the tablet again, but this time he did not just glance, he studied it, his thumb hovering over the screen as if the answers might rearrange themselves if he waited long enough. The glow reflected in his eyes, flickering like the patrol lights behind him. He scrolled once, then stopped, his jaw tightening slightly, not in anger, but in recognition. That is strange, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. One of the officers behind him leaned in just enough to see, then leaned back just as quickly, as if proximity might make him responsible for whatever was written there. Cole said nothing. He did not need to. His presence alone held the moment steady, forcing it to unfold without interference. Alicia watched quietly, her gaze not fixed on the tablet, but on Hayes himself, on the subtle shifts in his expression, the way certainty was giving way to something else, something slower, heavier. This report, Hayes said, his voice lower now, less performative, more careful. It came through as verified. He paused, scrolling again, his brow furrowing deeper. But there is no originating officer attached. The words landed softly, but they carried weight, like a floorboard, creaking in an otherwise silent house, the kind of sound that tells you something is not where it should be. Cole tilted his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the shift. No originating officer, he repeated, not questioning, just confirming. Hayes shook his head once, slow, controlled. It is flagged as priority, he added, but the chain is incomplete. Behind him, the line of officers had grown still. No one spoke. No radios crackled. Even the engines seemed quieter now, like the entire street was listening to the absence of something that should have been there. Alicia exhaled softly. Not relief, just a release of something she had been holding since the first siren cut through her evening. Hayes looked up from the tablet, his eyes moving between Cole and Alicia, the weight of the situation settling into him in layers. We responded to a call that may not have been properly sourced, he said, the phrasing careful, deliberate, as if choosing the right words might restore control. Cole took a step closer, not aggressive, just present, his voice calm but firm. Or it was sourced exactly as intended, he said, and the distinction hung in the air, sharp and quiet. Hayes blinked once, processing, his grip on the tablet loosening just slightly. You are suggesting this was intentional, he said, not quite ready to say it outright. Cole did not answer immediately. He let the silence do the work. Let the thought settle fully before giving it shape. I am suggesting, he said finally, that you might want to consider who benefits from sending 10 units to the wrong address. Hayes' gaze shifted again, not to the tablet this time, but to the street, to the houses, to the watching windows, to the quiet witnesses holding their phones like evidence. Something in his posture changed, not dramatically, but enough to be felt, like a line being redrawn inside him. We followed protocol, he said. But the words no longer sounded like defense. They sounded like distance. Cole nodded once, acknowledging the truth without accepting its comfort. Protocol does not replace judgment, he replied, and the sentence landed without force. But it stayed. Hayes inhaled slowly, then turned slightly, looking back at his team, at the cars, at the lights that now felt excessive, unnecessary. He lowered the tablet, his arm resting at his side, and for a brief moment, he said nothing. The street remained still, the air thick with a quiet that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with realization. Alicia stood where she had been from the start, her presence unchanged, her calm no longer mistaken for weakness but recognized, finally, as something else entirely. And Hayes looked back at her, not as a suspect, not as a problem to solve, but as someone he had misjudged, the realization settling into him not with noise, but with weight. And somewhere in that silence, the night shifted. Again, quieter now, but far more honest than before. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, slowly, like something heavy being set down after being carried too long. Hayes stood there with the tablet still in his hand, but it no longer looked like a tool of authority. It looked like a question he did not know how to answer. His thumb hovered over the screen again, then pressed, scrolling back through the report, as if retracing steps might undo the path that brought him here. Dispatch, he said into his radio, his voice steady but lower now, more careful. I need verification on a priority call. Case reference number is on screen. There was a pause. Static filled the space briefly. Then a voice responded, distant, routine, unaware of the shift happening on this street. Hayes turned slightly away from Alicia and Cole. Not to exclude them, but to gather himself, to create a space where he could think without being watched, though he knew he was still being watched, by everyone, by the officers behind him, by the neighbors across the street, by the man standing calmly just a few feet away who had said very little but changed everything. Repeat that, Hayes said after a moment, his brow tightening again, but this time not with confusion, with recognition, the kind that settles in slowly but firmly. No, that is not possible, he added, his voice almost under his breath, but still heard, still felt. One of the officers behind him shifted closer, not intruding, just listening. Hayes lowered the radio slightly, his gaze dropping to the ground for a second, then lifting again toward Cole. Dispatch cannot confirm the origin, he said, the words landing with a quiet finality. They have no record of who filed it. The statement did not echo, it sank, like something dropped into deep water. Cole nodded. Once, not surprised, not satisfied, just acknowledging what had now been said out loud. Alicia's eyes moved briefly toward the line of patrol cars, then back to Hayes, her expression unchanged, but something in the air around her felt steadier, like the ground beneath her had always been solid. It was just now that everyone else noticed. Hayes exhaled slowly, then reached up and pressed his radio again. All units, he said, his voice carrying now, not louder, but clearer, more deliberate. Hold position. The officers behind him froze in place, their earlier tension replaced with something else, something closer to waiting for instruction that would actually mean something. Hayes lowered the radio once more, his shoulders dropping slightly, not in defeat, but in acceptance of what was unfolding. He turned fully toward Alicia now, not stepping closer, not stepping back, just facing her. Ma'am, he said, and the words sounded different this time, not procedural, not distant, but real. It appears this situation may have been initiated under incorrect information. He paused, choosing his next words carefully, as if each one mattered more than the last. And for that, I take responsibility for how this has been handled so far. The apology was not complete, not yet, but it was beginning, and that alone changed the space between them. Alicia did not respond immediately. She simply looked at him, her gaze steady, not forgiving, not condemning, just present, as if weighing not the words, but the intent behind them. Cole remained where he was, silent, allowing the moment to belong to them, to unfold without interference. The street remained still, the lights continued their slow pulse, but now they felt out of place, like a scene that had not caught up with the truth yet. Hayes glanced briefly toward his team, then back at Alicia. We will need to clear out, he said, more to himself than anyone else. the realization settling into action, and for the first time since the sirens arrived, the authority on this street did not come from the number of vehicles or the volume of voices. It came from the quiet decision to stop, to reassess, to step back from something that should not have happened in the first place. And Alicia stood there, exactly as she had from the beginning, calm, steady, not because she was unaffected, but because she understood something they were only just beginning to see. For a moment, no one moved, not because they were told to stay still, but because the moment itself demanded it, the kind of silence that settles when something invisible has just been revealed. Hayes lowered his radio completely now, his hand resting at his side, no longer gripping it like a lifeline. The flashing lights continued behind him, but they felt disconnected, like they belonged to an earlier version of this scene that had already passed. One of the officers near the end of the line shifted his stance, then looked toward Hayes, waiting, not for orders, but for direction that made sense. Hayes took a slow breath, then turned slightly, his voice steady. "Stand down," he said, not loud, but clear enough that it carried. One by one, the tension in the line of officers began to ease, shoulders dropping, radios lowering. The invisible line that had surrounded Alicia's home started to dissolve without anyone physically stepping away yet. It was subtle, but it was real. Cole remained still, his presence unchanged, watching not the officers, but Hayes, as if measuring something deeper than the moment itself. Alicia stood on the edge of her porch, the faint creak of wood beneath her feet, grounding her in a reality that had finally caught up with her truth. She glanced briefly toward the neighbors, their phones still raised, their faces lit by screens and curiosity, then back to the scene in front of her, not seeking validation, not needing it, just observing. Hayes stepped closer to her now, not too close, just enough to speak without raising his voice. "We will be clearing the area," he said, his tone respectful, stripped of the earlier assumptions. Alicia nodded once, her expression calm, but there was something new beneath it, not triumph, not relief, something quieter, something that came from being seen correctly after being seen wrong. Hayes hesitated for a fraction of a second, then added, "I am sorry for the disruption." The words were simple, but they landed differently than anything else he had said tonight, because they were not spoken from authority, they were spoken from understanding. Alicia looked at him, really looked this time, her gaze steady but not cold. "Just make sure it does not happen to someone else," she said softly, her voice carrying more weight than its volume suggested. Hayes nodded, once, firm, accepting not just the statement, but the responsibility behind it. Behind him, doors began to close, engines shifted from idle to movement, not in a rush, not chaotic, but controlled, the line of vehicles slowly preparing to leave the same way they had arrived, only now without urgency, without noise. Cole finally turned slightly toward Alicia, his expression calm, but there was a hint of something softer there, something that had nothing to do with authority and everything to do with history. "You handled that well," he said quietly. Alicia let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. "I did not do anything," she replied. Cole gave a slight shake of his head. "Exactly," he said, and the meaning settled between them without needing explanation. A moment passed, quiet, grounded, then Cole stepped back, giving space back to the street, to the normal that was slowly returning. Hayes turned once more to his team, giving a final nod, and the first patrol car pulled away, then the next, red and blue fading into the distance, leaving behind a street that felt different, not because anything physical had changed, but because something had been understood, something corrected. Alicia stepped back onto her porch fully now, the wood warm beneath her feet, the night air softer without the weight of accusation pressing against it. And as the last of the lights disappeared around the corner, the silence that remained was no longer tense, it was honest, and for the first time since the voice had called her outside, it belonged to her again. The last patrol car disappeared around the corner, its fading lights swallowed by the curve of the street, and for a brief moment the silence that followed felt almost unfamiliar, like the neighborhood did not quite remember how to sound without sirens cutting through it. Alicia Brooks stood still on her porch, her hand resting lightly against the doorframe, grounding herself in something solid, something real. The faint hum of her refrigerator drifted through the open doorway behind her, steady and unchanged, a quiet reminder that not everything had shifted tonight. Across the street, one curtain fell back into place, then another, phones lowered, screens dimmed, the audience dissolving now that the story no longer belonged to spectacle, just to truth. Cole remained near the edge of the driveway, his posture relaxed but attentive, watching the street return to itself piece by piece. He did not rush to leave, did not check a watch or reach for a phone. He simply stood there for a moment longer, as if making sure the quiet held. Alicia stepped fully inside her doorway, then paused, turning back slightly. "You did not have to come yourself," she said, her voice soft but clear in the still air. Cole gave a small breath that might have been a quiet laugh. "You know I would," he replied, not as obligation, not as duty, but as something simpler, something rooted in memory rather than rank. Alicia studied him for a second, the porch light casting a warm glow that softened the lines of the night. "That was a long time ago," she said, not dismissing it, just placing it where it belonged. Cole nodded once. "Some things do not expire," he answered, his tone calm. Certain, the kind of certainty that does not need reinforcement. Alicia looked down briefly at her hands, then back up, her expression thoughtful, not weighed down, just reflective. "They said a name tonight," she said. "One I thought was finished." Cole's gaze sharpened slightly, not alarmed, but focused. "And it should be," he said, the words measured, deliberate. Alicia took a small step back onto the porch, the wood creaking softly beneath her. "Then someone wanted it to start again," she replied, not asking, not assuming, just laying the possibility into the open space between them. Cole did not answer right away, his eyes moving once more down the street, as if tracing the path the patrol cars had taken, then back to her. "That is what we need to find out," he said, his voice lower now, carrying weight without raising volume. The night air shifted slightly, a soft breeze moving through the trees. The wind chimes near Alicia's door, clicking gently, a quiet rhythm that felt more honest than the sirens had been. Alicia leaned lightly against the doorframe, not tired, but aware, the kind of awareness that comes after something almost breaks but does not. "I thought it was over," she said, more to herself than to him. Cole stepped a little closer, not crossing into her space, just closing the distance enough to be heard without effort. "It was," he said, then added, "but if someone is reopening it, they are not doing it by accident." Alicia nodded slowly, the truth of that settling into her without resistance, the kind of truth that does not shock because it feels familiar, even when it should not. A moment passed between them, quiet, steady. Then Cole glanced back toward the SUV behind him, its engine still running softly. "Waiting? I will have someone look into the source of that call," he said. Alicia met his gaze again. "No," she said gently. Cole paused, not surprised, just listening. "I will come with you," she added, her voice calm, certain, the same calm that had carried her through the flashing lights and the questions and the weight of being watched. Cole studied her for a second, measuring not her words, but her resolve, then gave a single nod, not reluctant, not hesitant, just accepting what had already been decided. Behind him, one of the men near the SUV straightened slightly, sensing the shift without needing to hear it. Alicia stepped back inside for just a moment, reaching for her keys. From the small table near the door, the familiar sound of metal against wood grounding her once more. When she stepped back out, the night felt different again, not heavy, not tense, but open, like something had ended and something else had quietly begun. And as she walked down the short path from her porch toward the waiting vehicle, the silence that followed her was no longer empty. It was purposeful. The car door closed with a soft, controlled sound that seemed louder only because everything else had gone quiet. Alicia Brooks settled into the back seat, her hands resting loosely in her lap, the faint scent of leather and cool air wrapping around her as the outside world dimmed behind tinted glass. Commander Ethan Cole took the seat beside her without a word, the door sealing the moment in. The driver glanced once in the rearview mirror, not asking, just confirming. Then the SUV pulled forward, smooth, deliberate, the street slipping away behind them one house at a time. Alicia watched through the window as her porch light grew smaller, then disappeared entirely, not with sadness, not with fear, just with awareness that something had shifted beyond the boundaries of that house. The hum of the engine filled the silence, steady and controlled, Like everything about this night now. Cole leaned back slightly. His posture relaxed but alert, his eyes forward, not avoiding her, just allowing the space to settle before speaking. You recognized the name immediately, he said finally, his voice low, measured. Alicia nodded once, her gaze still on the passing shadows outside. I did, she replied, her tone even, but beneath it was something deeper, something layered. And you were sure it should not be active. He continued, not pressing, just building the line of thought. Alicia turned her head slightly now, looking at him. It was closed, she said, completely, the word hung between them, not as reassurance, but as something that had already been tested once before. Cole studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Then someone reopened it, he said, echoing what she had already understood. The SUV turned onto a wider road, streetlights passing in rhythmic intervals, casting brief lines of light across their faces, then fading just as quickly. Alicia exhaled softly, her fingers tightening slightly before relaxing again. That file, she said. It was not just paperwork. Cole did not respond immediately, but his attention sharpened. It carried names, she continued. Connections, things that were not supposed to be seen outside a certain circle. Cole's jaw shifted slightly, not in tension, but in focus. And you were part of that circle, he said. Alicia gave a small nod. For a time, she answered, her voice steady, but quieter now, like she was stepping carefully through something that still held weight. The driver slowed slightly as they approached an intersection, the red light reflecting faintly inside the car, bathing everything in a muted glow. If someone pulled that name, Cole said, they either had access, or they wanted it to look like they did. Alicia looked forward again, the reflection of the light catching briefly in her eyes. Either way, she said, they knew exactly what it would trigger. The light turned green. The SUV moved again, seamless, uninterrupted. Cole leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, his voice lower now, more direct. Then this was not about you being there tonight, he said. Alicia shook her head once, slow, deliberate. No, she replied. It was about seeing who would show up. The words settled into the space between them, heavy but clear. Cole leaned back again, the meaning already taking shape in his mind. And now they know, he said. Alicia did not respond immediately. She simply watched the road ahead through the windshield, the lines of light stretching forward into the distance. Yes, she said finally, her voice calm, but certain. Now they know. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence not empty, but full, like a question that had just been asked without needing words. The city began to rise around them slowly, buildings replacing houses, lights growing denser, the world expanding beyond the quiet street they had left behind. But the weight of that street remained with them, carried forward in the understanding that whatever had started there was not finished, not yet. And Alicia sat still, composed, not because she felt safe, but because she understood something deeper, something that had guided her from the moment she stepped onto that porch, that this was never about proving who she was. It was about revealing who had been watching all along. The SUV slowed as it turned into a secured underground entrance, the city lights fading behind them and replaced by the muted glow of overhead concrete lamps. The transition from open streets to controlled space was subtle but absolute, the kind that did not announce itself yet changed everything. Alicia Brooks felt it immediately, not tension, not fear, just awareness. The air itself felt different, cooler, contained. The vehicle rolled forward smoothly before coming to a precise stop, the engine idling softly like it was waiting for permission to rest. The driver stepped out first, opening Alicia's door with a quiet efficiency that carried no urgency, only purpose. She stepped out onto the polished concrete floor, the faint echo of her footsteps following her, grounding her in the reality of where she now stood. Commander Ethan Cole exited from the other side, closing his door with the same measured control he had carried all night. The space around them was quiet, not empty, but disciplined, a place where movement meant something and silence was part of the structure. A man approached from the far end of the garage, his pace steady, posture straight, not hurried but direct. He stopped a few feet from Cole, giving a brief nod. "We have started pulling logs," he said, his voice low, professional. The call routing does not match standard dispatch protocols. Cole nodded once. Absorbing the information without surprise, Alicia remained still, listening, her eyes moving briefly between them, not intruding, just present. "Show me," Cole said, and the man gestured toward a secured door along the wall. Its surface plain but unmistakably reinforced. They moved together, footsteps quiet against the concrete. The door opened with a soft mechanical click, revealing a controlled interior space lit by soft white panels. Multiple screens lined the far wall, each displaying streams of data that moved too fast to read at a glance, but carried a rhythm that suggested precision. Alicia stepped inside. The temperature slightly cooler, the air cleaner, almost filtered, the kind of environment built for clarity, not comfort. Cole moved toward the nearest screen, his gaze scanning quickly, not searching, just confirming. "There," the technician said, pointing to a highlighted section. "This is the call that triggered the response." Alicia stepped closer, her eyes narrowing slightly as she focused. The numbers and identifiers meant something to her, not as codes, but as patterns. "That routing sequence," she said quietly, her voice cutting gently through the room. "It is masked." The technician glanced at her, then back at the screen. "We thought so," he replied. "But it is layered, not standard masking." Alicia leaned in slightly, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the console, not touching the controls, just anchoring herself. "It is not trying to disappear," she said. "It is trying to look official." Cole's gaze shifted to her, the distinction landing immediately. "Which means someone wanted it to pass without question," he said. Alicia nodded once. "And it did," she replied, the quiet truth settling into the room. The technician adjusted something on the screen, bringing up a deeper layer of data, lines of code resolving into something more structured, more deliberate. "There is a signature buried here," he said, his voice tightening slightly, not with alarm, but with recognition. Alicia's eyes followed the pattern, her focus sharpening. "Not a name," she said. "A method." Cole stepped closer now, his presence narrowing the space around the screen. "Can you trace it?" he asked. The technician hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. "It will take time," he said. "Whoever built this knew how to leave just enough to mislead." Alicia straightened slowly, her gaze lifting from the screen to Cole. "Then they wanted to be followed," she said, her voice calm, but carrying a weight that shifted the air again. Cole held her gaze for a moment, then looked back at the data, the lines moving, shifting, revealing pieces without giving the whole. "Or they wanted to see who would follow," he replied. The room fell quiet again, not empty, but focused, every movement now deliberate, every sound measured, and Alicia stood there, not as someone pulled into something unexpected, but as someone who had stepped back into a world she understood far better than she ever wanted to. The realization settling in without resistance, without panic, just clarity, and somewhere within that clarity, the understanding that tonight had not been a mistake, it had been a message, one that had been delivered exactly as intended. The room did not feel colder, but something in it sharpened, like the air itself had been filtered down to only what mattered. Alicia Brooks stood still beside the console, her eyes tracing the moving data not as noise, but as language, patterns forming and dissolving in a rhythm she had not seen in years, but had never truly forgotten. The technician adjusted the display again, isolating a segment that pulsed faintly against the darker background. "There is repetition here," he said, his voice quieter now, almost cautious. "Not random, not system-generated." Alicia leaned slightly closer, her gaze narrowing as the pattern revealed itself more clearly. "It is not repetition," she said softly. "Is intention." The distinction settled into the space like a key turning in a lock. Cole stepped closer, his presence grounding but focused. "Explain," he said. Alicia did not look away from the screen. "Random masking tries to hide," she said. "This does not hide. It invites." The technician frowned slightly. "Invites what?" he asked. Alicia straightened slowly, her hand leaving the edge of the console. "Attention," she replied. The words simple but heavy. Cole's eyes shifted between the data and Alicia, the meaning forming quickly now. "So whoever built this wanted it to be found," he said. Alicia nodded once. "But only by someone who would recognize it," she added, her voice calm. Certain. The technician stepped back slightly, his eyes moving between them. That narrows the field, he said. Cole exhaled slowly, his gaze returning to the screen. Not as much as it should, he replied. Alicia turned her head slightly, looking at him now. No, she said. It narrows the intention, not the person. The room fell quiet again, the hum of the systems filling the space like a steady heartbeat. Cole folded his arms loosely, not defensive, just thinking. They pulled a name that should not exist anymore, he said. They routed it through a system designed to look legitimate, and they waited. Alicia held his gaze. Not waited, she said. Watched. The correction was small, but it shifted everything. The technician glanced back at the screen, as if expecting something new to appear just from the change in language. Then they saw who responded. He said, almost to himself. Cole nodded once. And now they know who is connected, Alicia added, her voice steady. But there was something deeper beneath it now. Not fear, not doubt, something closer to acceptance, the kind that comes when a situation reveals itself fully. Cole looked at her for a moment longer, then back at the data. Can you isolate the entry point? He asked the technician. The man hesitated briefly, then began typing, the soft clicks filling the space, lines shifting, narrowing, focusing. It is fragmented, he said after a moment. But there is a convergence point. Alicia stepped closer again, her eyes scanning the new display. There, she said, pointing to a small cluster of data that looked insignificant at first glance. That is not random traffic. The technician adjusted the zoom. The cluster expanding into something more defined, more deliberate. It is routed through a private relay, he said. Not commercial, not public. Cole's expression did not change, but something in his posture tightened just slightly. Government, he said, not asking. Alicia did not answer immediately. She simply watched the data, the lines, the structure, then nodded once. Or something that knows how to look like it, she replied. The distinction hanging between them, sharp and unresolved. The technician leaned back, his hands hovering above the keyboard. If this is internal, he said slowly, then whoever initiated it had clearance. Alicia's gaze shifted from the screen to the room itself, as if seeing beyond it, beyond the walls, beyond the systems. Or they had access to someone who did, she said. Cole turned to face her fully now, the weight of that statement settling into him. Which means this is not just a false call, he said. Alicia met his eyes, her expression calm but unyielding. No, she replied. Is a signal. The word lingered in the air, quiet but undeniable. And in that moment, the room did not feel like a place of analysis anymore. It felt like the center of something much larger, something already in motion, something that had been set into place long before tonight. And Alicia stood there, not surprised, not overwhelmed, just present, as if she had known all along that the truth would not stay buried, only waiting for the right moment to be seen. The word stayed in the room longer than anything else had, not loud, not repeated, just present, like a quiet truth that did not need to be reinforced to be understood. Alicia Brooks stood still, her gaze steady on the screen for one last second before lifting, not searching, just acknowledging that what they were looking at was no longer a question. It was confirmation. Commander Ethan Cole did not move immediately, but something in his posture shifted, subtle, controlled, like a decision had been made without needing to be spoken. The technician glanced between them, waiting, not for instruction, but for direction that carried weight. If it is a signal, he said carefully, then it was meant to be answered. Alicia turned slightly toward him, her expression calm, but there was something deeper now, something sharpened by understanding. It already was, she replied, her voice even. The implication settling in slowly but firmly. Cole nodded once, his eyes returning to the data. Then the question is not who sent it, he said. It is what they expect next. The room fell quiet again. But this silence was different, not uncertain, not waiting. It was active, like something unfolding just beyond reach. Alicia stepped back from the console, her hands resting loosely at her sides. They expect movement, she said, reaction, maybe even confusion. Cole turned to face her fully now, his gaze focused. And what do you think they did not expect? He asked. Alicia met his eyes, her answer immediate. Clarity, she said. The word simple, but it landed with precision. The technician shifted slightly, his fingers hovering above the keyboard. Unsure whether to continue or wait, Cole gave a small nod toward him. "Keep tracing," he said. "But do not push it too far." The man nodded quickly, returning to the system. His movements more cautious now, more deliberate. Alicia walked slowly across the room, her steps quiet against the smooth floor, stopping near the far wall where another screen displayed a broader network map, lines branching out in multiple directions, some fading, some holding steady. She studied it for a moment, her eyes following the paths not as lines, but as choices, as intentions. "They left this open," she said, not turning. Cole moved closer, standing beside her now, his gaze tracking the same display. "Not open." He corrected softly, controlled. Alicia nodded once, accepting the distinction. "Then we do not close it," she said. Cole looked at her, the meaning clear before she finished. "We follow it," he said. Alicia's expression did not change, but something in her stance settled, grounded, but not directly. She added. Cole's brow shifted slightly. "Explain," he said. Alicia turned her head just enough to meet his gaze. "If they are watching for response," she said, "then any direct move confirms their expectation." Cole exhaled slowly, understanding forming. Quickly. "So we give them something else," he said. Alicia nodded. "Something that looks like movement," she replied, "but is not the one they are waiting for." The technician glanced back at them, his expression tightening with focus. "A decoy," he said. Alicia shook her head slightly. "Not a decoy," she corrected. "A misdirection." Cole's eyes narrowed just enough to show the shift in thinking. "Subtle," he said. Alicia gave a faint nod. "It has to be," she replied. The room settled again, not into silence, but into alignment. Each person now moving within the same understanding, the same direction. Cole stepped back slightly, his voice steady. "Set up a parallel trace," he instructed the technician. "Mirror the signal without engaging the source." The man nodded, his hands moving quickly now, but with precision. Alicia remained where she was, her gaze returning to the network map, the lines still moving, still shifting, but now they felt different, no longer something to react to, but something to navigate. And as the system began to adjust under their direction, the realization settled in fully, not loud, not overwhelming, but clear, that whatever had been set into motion tonight was no longer controlled by the one who sent it. It had changed hands the moment it was understood, and Alicia stood there, calm, steady, not because the situation had become simple, but because it had finally become visible. The screens continued to move, lines shifting, signals branching, data flowing in patterns that no longer felt chaotic but intentional, guided now, redirected. Alicia Brooks stood quietly at the edge of it all, her reflection faintly visible in the glass of the display. Layered over the network, she was now helping to navigate. Commander Ethan Cole watched the technician adjust the mirrored trace, the system responding with a quiet precision that felt almost surgical, not forceful, not invasive. Just enough to touch the edges without disturbing the center. "It is holding," the technician said, his voice low but steady. "Whoever set the original signal has not reacted yet." Cole nodded once, his gaze steady. "They will," he said, not as a prediction, but as a certainty. Alicia's eyes remained on the screen, but her focus had shifted beyond it. "Not immediately," she said softly. "They are patient. They will wait to see if the pattern breaks." The technician adjusted another parameter. The mirrored signal bending slightly, creating a subtle deviation, not enough to alert, just enough to suggest movement. Cole glanced toward Alicia. "And when it does not?" he asked. Alicia turned her head slightly, her expression calm, grounded. "Then they will come closer," she replied, the words settling into the room with quiet weight. A moment passed, the systems humming softly, the air steady. Then a small change flickered across one of the screens, a shift so slight it might have been missed if they were not already watching for it. The technician leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "There," he said, pointing, "secondary ping." Cole stepped closer, his presence tightening the space. "Source," he said. The technician's fingers moved quickly, isolating the signal, tracing its path. The lines converging again, but this time faster, more direct. "It is adjusting," the technician said, responding to the mirror. Alicia stepped forward, her gaze fixed, not responding. She corrected quietly. Testing. Cole's eyes flicked toward her, then back to the screen. Understanding settling in. They are checking if it is real, he said. Alicia nodded once. And if it is not, she added. The technician exhaled slowly. Then they know they have been seen. The room held its breath for a fraction of a second, the kind of pause that exists only when something important is about to reveal itself. The signal shifted again, sharper this time, more defined, the path narrowing. Into a single direction. We have a direction, the technician said, his voice carrying a hint of urgency now, but still controlled. Cole did not move immediately. He watched the line stabilize, confirming before acting. Then he nodded once. Lock it, he said. The technician executed the command, the system anchoring the signal without alerting its source. Alicia stepped back slightly, her eyes still on the screen, but her posture relaxed just enough to signal the shift. The moment had turned. The unknown had taken shape. Cole turned toward her, his voice quiet but clear. You were right, he said. Alicia looked at him, not surprised, not seeking validation, just acknowledging the outcome. It was never about the call, she replied. Cole nodded once. It was about the response, he said. Alicia's gaze returned to the screen, the line now steady, undeniable. And now we know where it leads, she said softly. The room settled again, but this time it was different. Not tension, not uncertainty, but direction, purpose, the kind that does not rush because it no longer needs to search. Cole took a step back, his voice calm, decisive. We move carefully, he said, not as a warning, but as a principle. Alicia nodded once, her expression unchanged, steady. We already are, she replied. The faint hum of the system filled the silence that followed, not empty, not waiting, but complete. And somewhere within that quiet, the truth of the night settled fully into place, not as something dramatic, not as something loud, but as something simple and undeniable, that she had not needed to raise her voice. She had not needed to fight. She had only needed to stand. And in doing so, she had changed the direction of everything without ever stepping out of who she was.